תשים לעולם. כי אתה הוא מלך הדור, לכל השלום. כי אתה הוא מלך הדור, לכל השלום. שלום ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. שלום רב ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. בטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. שלום רב ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם.
Oh yeah, we need to get rid of that white thing. Thank you, Max Goldhirsch. Thank you, Kim. I want to say hello and welcome to the Buffalo Corner Reading Series, now in its 5th year. I don't know if anybody can hear me, but I hope so. Thanks to Congregation Shir Shalom, our featured readers, and to you who come to hear us live or via Zoom. Our profound thanks to Rabbi and poet Alexander Lazarus Klein for his support and participation, and also to Executive Director Joanne Marquesi for keeping us all sane. Thank you. And on the straight and narrow path we need to be on. Now, I happen to know that both have had birthdays recently, so happy birthday to Rabbi and Joel. I also want to welcome our one featured reader, Stephen Ewanu. As some of you know already, I'm afraid I have to inform you that Karen Elizabeth Sharp is not going to Zoom in tonight because she has taken seriously ill in Massachusetts, and she said she couldn't even join us. So therefore, I wish everybody who is here and on Zoom welcome. We will all ask our readers to read a little extra. We will ask Max, if he doesn't mind, to come and play a little extra. And I think we'll have a very nice evening, just who we are tonight. So please, Rabbi Alex, welcome.
Well, thank you, Gunilla, as always, for your wonderful leadership on this, and Irene. Nice to see you as well. Hope you're feeling well. And it's always an honor. Gunilla said I had time to do a couple more poems, so I have written a bunch lately, and you know, they're kind of testers, so we'll see how they go. You can tell me how you feel about them. Yeah, if I go.
Sorry. We can see everybody else.
But look how beautiful my shirt looks when it's reflected upon. Now we can see. Here we go. So this first one, Halloween, we had a week and a half ago. And I always like the morning after Halloween. So this is after Hallows. A sad pink unicorn sits deflating on my neighbor's lawn. The jack-o'-lantern, with the mischievous smile, stoops lower toward the earth. Even the skeletons sitting on lawn chairs seem bored. The morning after Halloween, the children shuffle slowly to their bus stops. My dogs have stopped growling at decorations. The world has been freed of all kitsch for at least until December. Still, memories of the night before linger, neighbors offering hot spike cider, the joyful bliss of children approaching doors with already 2 full bags of candy. I try to imagine the face of my down the street neighbor. Nothing comes to mind. The window of ringing doorbells has closed. My next door neighbor asks if we have any canned pineapple for a dish he is making that night. Sadly, I tell him no. Candy, I ask, knowing I have bags and bags sitting on my dining room table. This one's called Dog Types. I have a friend who started classifying people by dog types. I thought that was an interesting way to figure out, well, this person is this way for that reason. So, a few weeks ago, I did the Stockbridge poetry, and I said I write on my walk, and I wrote this right after on the walk with the dogs. Someone I know always compared everyone to dogs. He was a retriever, always wanting to please. She a boxer pup, needy and clingy. That one a retriever, always searching for things they can't find. As I thought about it, I knew she was right. I only wished our shape and color could be pinned down as easily as a dog's. I remember that was the real skill, not the name. I realized that was the real skill, not the naming, but the identifying. If you could just glance over and know how to approach, everything else would be easy. True, there would be mistakes, like the loving pits we prejudice even before feeling their lick. But more often than not, it would be so much easier than race or gender or any other type of crap. Too bad I didn't have the faintest idea of dog types, even as one comes now with only the slightest hint of a growl that could easily be mistaken for a smile. The next two are kind of about the situation that's ongoing. One is going to be about, I attended the rally in DC, the largest Jewish rally in our nation's history, with 250,000 people present and 250,000 people watching online. But this one was written maybe a week or two ago. I was thinking about in the Israeli-Palestinian situation, I listened to a podcast that said, when you have two victims, two people that feel victimized together, that's like adding kerosene to the fire. So this is called victimhood. Victims were created at night, tucked in their mother's hands, clasped around a fragile book, reading stories of terebinths and camel water. Victims were created by the teacher's pencil, carving shapes of old maps where farmers pulled thin strands of carrots and cucumbers out of dry soil. Victims were created by the heavy clank of tanks and the soft ring of whispered goodbyes in back alleyways under the shade of clouds. Victims were created by people with kind hearts who pointed fingers with covered eyes at people they never intended harm. Victims were created by politicians who sat in faraway offices demanding others to carry out their words. Victims were created by poems like this one, whose words will soon be pulled apart like cheese awaiting mice. See them gnawing. That is what happens anytime ink is imprisoned in books, later to be read to daughters as they drift towards sleep. And this last one I was just writing tonight. I thought, well, I'll be inspired. We'll see how it goes. It's called The Rally in DC. A murder of crows perch on poplars by FedEx Stadium. They gather watching us as we wait. A long line of buses is collected in the parking lot. We are heading to the Capitol for a rally. Thousands of us are here holding signs announcing we stand with Israel from our various points of origin. After 12 hours of driving, we meander bleary-eyed to the metro, where we board a train to the Smithsonian. I sit with my kids on the plastic seat singing Am Yisrael Chai with a participant from West Orange, New Jersey. The sign my son made has several pictures of his cousins, also from West Orange, now in combat in Gaza. We lift the sign high as we can as we walk up to Pennsylvania Avenue. Behind us, the Washington Monument stands pensive. Our group of 100 Buffalonians meanders through the crowd, trying hard to stay close to one another, watching the enlarged face of my childhood hero, Natan Sharansky, welcoming his mishpacha to join together in singing Hatikva in waves of broken verse. Hours later, we return to the bus. I imagine the murder of crows still sitting on poplars, now hidden in darkness, as we begin the long journey of heading back. Turn it back over to Gunilla.
Thank you, Neva.
You're very welcome, and thank you for all of you joining, either asynchronistically or synchronously.
For those of you who are new here, I don't know how many we are, but we don't usually applaud in the sanctuary. So if you feel like you want to say thank you to Rabbi, you would do this. Now, I had a theme going for tonight that had to do with dogs. So I'm glad you read and spoke about walking your dogs. And our featured reader tonight, he has a probing intellect and a very analytical mind, dialectic, I would say, but he also has a one-eyed dog. And one of his later books we'll talk about it's about some detective, yes, Sherlock Holmes of Buffalo with a one-eyed dog. So, you know, those of you who know me, I'm very much for dogs. So, yeah, I'm very interested in this. So, yeah, oops, my papers have gotten misplaced here. Never mind. So our first featured reader, our only featured reader tonight is Stephen G. Ewano. Stephen is a first-generation Greek-American writer from Buffalo, New York. He graduated from SUNY at Buffalo with a BA in communication and went on to earn a master's in English from Miami University and an MFA in creative writing from Queen's University in Charlotte. Why did you ever move back here? I mean, you've been to all those warm places, never mind. His first short story collection called Muscle Cars won a prestigious literary award, and his debut novel, Rook, is based on the true story of Al Nussbaum, a bank robber who led a double life and whom J. Edgar Hoover once described as the most cunning fugitive alive. Yesteryear, which I have here, oh, if I can show it to you. His latest novel was recently released. It tells the story of how radio playwright Fran Stryker created the character of the Lone Ranger. And this book won an award before it was even published, correct? He also wrote a mystery called After Pearl, and this is the one about the private investigator and his one-eyed dog. Since I'm all for dogs, here we have lots of suspense and mysteries, so please welcome Stephen G. Ewano.
Thank you. Situate here. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to talking about yesteryear. And yesteryear started, I think, in a bar. I can't remember exactly if I was at a bar or a party, but somebody had said to me that the creator of the Lone Ranger was from Buffalo. And I said, absolutely not, because I would have heard about him, right? Because I'm a Buffalo-based writer. Buffalo's very good about celebrating anybody created who had anything to do with Buffalo, and celebrated them, whether it's the Goo Goo Dolls or Joyce Carol Oates or Mark Twain, who was just here for a couple of years. We adopted him as our own. I said I would have known if somebody had, from Buffalo had written the Lone Ranger. So I immediately Googled it, and of course, he was not only from Buffalo, he was from the Elmwood Village, where I had been living for 20 years. He went to Lafayette High School, which was just a couple blocks from my old house, and he wrote the Lone Ranger on Granger Place, just north of me off of Forest Avenue. And I was intrigued. I said, how can I have not known about this man who not only wrote the Lone Ranger, he also created the Green Hornet and Sergeant Preston, the Yukon, which were huge contributions to 20th century American pop culture, the early days of radio, and then of course they made the crossover to TV and movies, novels, comic strips, comic books. How could I not know this man's name? So I did some more research, not thinking I'm going to write about him. I was just curious. And I found out that this, he wrote this during the Depression, early days of radio, 1932. And Fran Stryker was financially responsible for about a dozen family members who had lost everything during the Depression. And they were either physically living with him over on Granger Place, or he was supporting them financially. And at this time, he was working for WEBR, local radio station still broadcasting today. And in those days of radio stations had their own orchestras, their own actors, their own writers, and they would perform comedies and dramas live on the air. And Stryker was a radio playwright. And what he was doing to make extra money to support all these people was he was repurposing old radio scripts and then mailing them out to other radio stations across the country and selling them between $2 and $6 or $7 an episode. So if you think of the early days of Netflix and other streaming services, those mediums, that new technology, they were starved for content. Well, it was the same way in 1932. Radio stations, especially the smaller ones, needed scripts, they needed substance, they needed creative content to broadcast over the air. So Fran was trying to sell these as one-offs. So he'd write them for WEBR, they'd premiere, and then he'd send them out to other radio stations. One of the radio stations that was buying Stryker's scripts was WXYZ out of Detroit, and it was owned by a man named George Washington Trendle. And Trendle had the nickname as the miser of Motown because he was very cheap. And he had kept a couple sets of books, and he would show his employees, hey, I can't give you a raise. I know it's a depression, but look at these books. I'm bleeding money. He'd hire people and say, I can't pay you right away. Look at my books, and try to get as much free work out of them as he could. But by the winter of 1932, he was buying 3 or 4 scripts from Stryker a week. And then towards the end of that year, towards the end of December, he sent him a telegram. And he said to Fran, hey, can you write a Western? And I want all of the usual hokum in it. And that's the word he used, hokum. And I love that word. I want to bring it back. Girl tied to railroad tracks, masked riders, 2-gun shootouts. Can you do that? And Stryker said, absolutely. Because 2 years earlier, he had written a series called Covered Wagon Days that had broadcasted in Buffalo on WEBR. So for whatever reason, he took episode number 10 and rewrote it and introduced this character called the Lone Ranger. And I think the reason why I didn't know his name and how most people don't recognize Stryker's name as they would to like a Stan Lee from the comic book world is that Stryker ended up selling the rights to the Lone Ranger to Trendle for $10. So Stryker wasn't a dumb man, but he had all these financial responsibilities. So you fast forward a year, the Lone Ranger had been on the radio for about a year. Wasn't an instant success. They finally, after 8 or 9 months, got a sponsor. But Trendle had a sense that the Ranger was going to be something special. And so he offered Stryker a deal. He said, look, leave Buffalo, come to New York, work for me full time. No more sending these scripts out across the country. Put you on my payroll. You'll make more money than you ever had. You can be head writer. I guarantee you'll have a job during the Depression, so you can take care of all these family members. But the catch is you have to sell me the rights to Lone Ranger for $10. So now Fran was put in a hard position, right? He had all these financial responsibilities and never had a national hit. He was just a local Buffalo writer, a local guy. So do I take the money, take the job? Do I roll the dice and see if Ranger turns into anything? And I guess one thing we can say about Fran is he wasn't a risk taker. So he took the deal. He thought it was the best thing to do for his family at the time. He sold the rights for $10. He moved to Detroit. And of course, the Lone Ranger exploded and became a cultural phenomenon for 90 years. To give you some sense of the return on investment that Trendle got from the Lone Ranger, Stryker was writing not only the radio scripts, but the comic books, the comic strips in the newspaper. There was a series of hardback novels that he wrote about the Lone Ranger. Think of all the toys from the Lone Ranger. There were movies about the Lone Ranger. And in 1950, all that money went to Trendle. And then in 1954, with the advent of television, Trendle sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $3 million. And that was a record sale at the time for entertainment. And Stryker got like a little $10,000 bonus or something. He missed out on that, the money aspect. And then in the 1940s, we just go back a little bit, Trendle started claiming in interviews and articles that he was the creator of the Lone Ranger. So, and he kept telling that lie until about 1972 when he passed away. And so not only did Stryker miss out on the fortune, he also missed out on a lot of the fame. And when asked, he would say, look, you know, the people in the radio business, they know I wrote it. They know it was me. And they did. He's in the National Broadcasting Hall of Fame. He's in the Buffalo Broadcasting Hall of Fame. But the common person really doesn't know that. And as time has gone on, people have forgotten. So when I learned all this, I said, this is such a Buffalo story. It's wide right. It's no goal. We're going to build a new Peace Bridge. I sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10. So I said, I want to write about this. And I want to write it in a fun way. And I want to make it like a radio script. And I want to make it like an adventure story about a man who wrote adventure stories. So Stryker and John Barrett, who was the original Lone Ranger, because it premiered here on WEBR as a test pilot, and John Barrett, a Buffalo radio actor, was the original Lone Ranger. And so in my novel, not only are they best friends, but they're like the Lone Ranger and Tonto, and they're solving and trying to save the day, and they have all these adventures. So I like to read the first part to start off. As I said, this is in the form partially of a radio script. So it begins with stage directions, music up, and then the announcer speaks. Stryker is dead. Barrett read the article on page 53 of the Buffalo Evening News, not on the front page where it belonged. The newspaper shook in his hands, the headline blurred by tears. He'd been killed in a late afternoon car crash, a head-on collision that sent the other driver and his granddaughter to the hospital. Barrett was certain the accident had been Stryker's fault. He could picture the crash as if he was reading one of his radio scripts. Stryker behind the wheel, a Lucky dangling between his lips, the window cracked to let smoke coil in the autumn air. As his mind drifted from the highway to storylines, from storylines to characters, and finally from characters to scenes, the things that always cluttered Stryker's mind. His car had drifted across the double yellow lines and into the path of an oncoming station wagon. He did not die in impact. He had time to be surprised by this final plot twist. Barrett was sure that as Stryker sat pinned behind the steering wheel, his vision tunneling, he must have been thinking of the many ways he could describe the details surrounding the accident. The blood streaming from his scalp, laboring lungs about to quit, the cold spreading to his limbs. So his readers or listening audience would feel as if they were beside him, watching and hearing him die. The article had listed all that Stryker had accomplished in chronological order, but Barrett had known him before all that. Before the radio and TV shows, before the books and comics, before his characters had become cultural phenomena. Barrett knew him when they were both young, and Buffalo, New York was brimming with gangsters and bootleggers, dames and dolls, and there was not many heroes to be found except for the two of them. They were best friends back when bathtub gin blinded, when magic shimmered on Buffalo sidewalks like lost silver waiting to be found, back when Barrett was the original Lone Ranger. Stryker is dead, that much was certain, and Barrett hadn't spoken to him in 30 years. Return with us now to those thrilling days. Episode 1, Slattery's Rings. The magic didn't always occur at the typewriter. Sometimes it appeared after midnight, swirling over Buffalo's cobblestone streets like Christmas snow, accumulated on shoulders and hat brims, the pregnant flakes never melting. Tonight was such a night. When the clock struck 12, the bells in St. John's steeple rang across Colonial Circle, echoed off at General Bidwell's bronze statue, and reached Fran Stryker's house at 26 Granger Place. He looked up from his Remington 16 typewriter, his slender fingers poised above the keyboard, and cocked his head. The clapper striking the hour returned him from his world of heroes and villains to his attic writing studio, where his desk was tucked under a sloping eave. He checked his watch, certain a mistake had occurred, that time had accelerated, that he had somehow been transported into the future. It couldn't be midnight already. This was his witching hour, the moment his neighbors and extended family insisted that he stopped his relentless typing, complaining that the hammer's continuous striking, the single bell announcing each margin end, the sliding carriage being returned and returned and returned were keeping them awake, preventing them from rising early to search for jobs that didn't exist. He leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms towards heaven. A forgotten Lucky Strike smoldered in a littered ashtray. He reached for it, his fingertips nicotine golden, and took a final drag before stubbing it out. The house settled around him. The joists and load-bearing walls creaked and sighed as if relieved that the typing had finally ceased. On the floor below, his grandparents extinguished their nightstand lamps, thankful the clatter in the attic had ended. Across the hall from them, his brother-in-law Jerry lay smoking in bed, an ashtray balanced on his chest, praying for work. In the smallest bedroom, the boys, Bobby and Donnie, ages 4 and 2, slept curled in the same bed, unaware of their father's radio scripts or the late hour. In Stryker's bed, his wife Janet waited for him. And so that's how I introduced Fran. The next piece I want to read is how I introduced John L. Barrett. As I said, John was a real life person. He was a radio actor here in town. He, when they piloted the Lone Ranger, he was the original Lone Ranger. He left radio after Fran moved to Detroit and became an attorney, became a lawyer. And when he passed away and the New York Times ran his obituary, they said that they pointed out that he was the original Lone Ranger. And this part of the story, this is the beginning of episode 2. Stryker is walking home after he leaves. He goes for a walk after he finishes writing for the day. And while he's walking, there's some magical realism in this story. And he starts hearing this radio broadcast coming from somewhere. He can't tell where it's coming from the trees, from the apartments, from the houses he's walking past. And it's the radio broadcast of Covered Wagon Days, episode number 10, that they rebroadcast 2 years early. At the same time Stryker's walking home, Barrett is at WEBR in the radio station. And this is where episode 2 begins. So this is episode 2, Mystery of the Phantom Voices. Barrett stood in front of the dead microphone performing the Covered Wagon Day script. His voice, rich and resonant, boomed across the deserted studio as he delivered his lines. The words rang like struck notes. It was the sonorous voice of a man with broad shoulders, a cleft chin, someone strapping who stood over 6 feet, bootless. Barrett was none of these. He was shorter than most men, with delicate features, pronounced cheekbones, a slender nose, pale, graceful hands that floated when he gestured. Even his mustache was delicate, trimmed precisely like the silver screen actors he idolized. He developed a habit of smoothing the whiskers into place, first the right side and then the left. His hair, the color of Arabian sand, had begun to recede and was pomaded in place. When Barrett entered a restaurant or party, people didn't notice his pencil mustache or retreating hairline or floating hands. They didn't notice him at all until he spoke. Then heads would turn. Necks would crane to see who belonged to that voice that bordered between baritone and bass, whose words filled every corner before they pushed at walls, overturned furniture, and demanded to be heard. Surely a voice like that belonged to a talking picture star, a New York Yankee, a hero from the Great War. Barrett had a voice made for radio, so smooth and rich, it was destined to be heard by millions. He was certain of it. Buffalo families huddled around their Crosleys and RCA Victors and seeing the stratospheres each night, tuned to WEBR to hear him read the news or introduce the next program or star in the comedies and dramas written by Stryker. His voice was his instrument, like Stryker on his Remington or Artie Shaw with his clarinet. He mastered it, learning to modulate volume and timbre, to color tone, to extract emotions from Stryker words and send them over airways to the kitchens and living rooms and into the ears of his audience. He tugged tear ducts and pressed passions with mere inflection. His voice made hearts gallop. When he delivered his lines, people would turn to their wooden or bake-like radios and stare as if expecting him to stride from the speaker and perform in front of them. He could voice any role, villain, foil, young, old, but was best when he played the hero, and his wondrous phrasing was matched with his character's remarkable deeds. The taller the tale, the deeper his register. The head turners and neck craners who heard him speak at a restaurant or a party would burn with disappointment when they realized that the Olympian voice that had seized their attention belonged to a slender whisper of a man sporting a slender whisper of a mustache. They would return to their meals or resume conversation, feeling cheated, as if Barrett had somehow swindled them. Some would scowl or glare, their expressions shouting, "How dare he?" He grew sensitive to this and learned to rein his voice in public, to speak softly, to save all the full beauty of his vocalizations for the microphone, the way a stallion waits for open fields before running unrestrained. Barrett had no intention of performing the old Covered Wagon Day script in front of a lifeless microphone in an empty radio studio on a blustery winter night. He'd gone to the cluttered desk he shared with Stryker, searching for a box of Pine Brothers glycerin throat drops. He worried about sore throats, laryngitis, and somehow damaging his voice. Papers, old scripts, new scripts, half-finished scripts covered the desk like mounted snow. Even Stryker's Remington 16, the same model he had at home, was buried in radio plays. As Barrett approached the desk, certain he felt a tickle or scratching somewhere between his pharynx and larynx, an indication of an oncoming cold or strep or influenza. Covered Wagon Days, episode 10, Danger at the Gold Mine, tumbled from the pile and landed at his feet, open to the first page. So that's how I introduced Barrett. The other person that is important to the plot is, of course, George W. Trendle, the man who bought the rights to the Lone Ranger. And Trendle had made his fortune in Nickelodeon's, kind of the predecessor to the movie theaters. And he was a very intuitive businessman. And he sold all his Nickelodeons right before the crash in 1929, and all for cash. He didn't accept any credit or shares, and he invested it in radio. He bought this radio station, WXYZ, because he thought that was the next big thing. Actually, before he bought the radio station, he knew that Nickelodeons were on their way out, and so he got a group of investors and started building movie houses, because the movies were being produced, and they were longer in format. And so he thought people would want to go to these Nickelodeons with their uncomfortable chairs. And so he was one of the first ones to build like movie palaces. And then, of course, he sold those before the crash, and he bought the radio station. And this is how I introduce him in episode 3, and this is called The Gypsy's Curse. In Detroit, inside the Maccabees building, home of WXYZ, the last word in radio, station owner George Washington Trendle paced his oak-paneled office, oblivious to the gusts that painted his windows with a fine brush. Snowflakes, points, and branches were distinct against the glass. Everything about Trendle was round. His head was almost a perfect sphere, and so bald it was difficult to imagine hair had once grown on such a desolate spot. Black pince-nez pinched his nose. His stomach ballooned his vest, drawing his watch chain taut across the expanse. He pressed his abdomen as he paced, his insides aflame. His other hand gripped a bottle of Dr. Foley's pain relief medicine, guaranteed by Foley and Company of Chicago, Illinois, to cure colic, diarrhea, bowel complaints, rheumatic and neurologic pains, lame back, lumbago, swelling, bruises, sprains, chilblains, frostbites, sore throats, and toothaches. Trendle suffered from none of these. The concoction, made mostly of alcohol and chloroform, helped his simmering stomach, or at least helped him forget how much his stomach boiled. He pulled his hand from his vest, unscrewed the cap, and took a healthy swig. A soothing warmth spread through him, followed by a fuzzy numbness. Trendle stopped his pacing in front of the snow-painted window and surveyed Woodward Avenue. He glanced at the line of hungry men that stretched from the soup kitchen across the street and then ignored them. Trendle had his own problems. He was losing money. He stared out at the world with telescopic vision, the kind of power a radio superhero might possess. He could see all his dreams floating out of reach on the darkening horizon. WXYZ dominating the Detroit airwaves, allowing him to buy other stations in cities like Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, Lansing, Flint, and Kalamazoo, until he controlled all of Michigan's programming. A Niagara of advertising dollars would follow. With that kind of clout, it would be easy to expand outside of Michigan into Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin. He knew he could steal the troubled WHBL in Sheboygan for pennies. Trendle was a big man and dreamed big dreams that were bigger than Sheboygan itself. Why stop at Wisconsin? Why not become a national network, like the National Broadcasting Company or the Columbia Broadcasting System, WXYZ's parent? Why not the Trendle Broadcasting Company? TBC, he said aloud, his breath fogging the windows with avarice, the money he could make. Trendle, a heavy mouth breather, inhaled and exhaled faster and harder at the thought of these millions. The window fog in his dream became impossible to see. The problem with his vision was that WXYZ, the keystone of his planned empire, the launching point to the immense wealth he craved, was a lame dog, a nag dreaming of becoming a thoroughbred, a radio station that was losing $4,000 a week. His stomach roiled at the thought of his mounting losses. He had never failed at anything, making his reputation and money in theaters, and then banking it all on radio, convinced this new medium could triple his fortune and open doors he didn't even know existed. He took a deep, thoughtful swig of Dr. Foley's cure-all. He'd been mulling his options for weeks. It was time to act. Campbell, he barked without facing his closed office door. Get in here. He turned when he heard the door open. Alan Campbell stood in the doorway, still holding the knob in case he had to shut the door quickly to block flung ashtrays or paperweights, a common occurrence as the gouged door attested. Campbell, a slender man with wiry hair that refused to stay calm, held many positions at WXYZ. Sales manager, business manager, Trendle's assistant. Why pay 3 people when Campbell could do everything on one small salary? Come in, Alan Trendle said, looking past him to a man sitting in the waiting area who was all limbs with jutting elbows and protruding knees. He wore an ill-fitting coat, and his hollow cheeks hinted that he needed a good meal, perhaps several. Shut the door, he said, as the man wiped his nose with a black neckerchief. Trendle nodded to the chair in front of his desk, but remained standing by the window, the wind swirling outside as if eavesdropping. Thank you.
You, wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen. I was kind of saying that he has this analytical mind, dialectic. And so I just opened the book at random and I found a paragraph. I'm not going to read it now, but yes, it proved me right. So now I would like to invite Irene Cyprus, my co-hostess, who is here online, to read 1 or 2 or 3 poems. I don't know what you feel like doing. I'm sorry you couldn't be here in person tonight because we miss you, but would you please read through Zoom?
Thank you, Gunilla. Stephen graced us with a little more time because we didn't have Karen. So maybe I will, and thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Gunilla and Rabbi. Really appreciated those poems. I've been writing kind of heavy poems because of the situation in the world, but I'll just read a very short. It's also been a gorgeous fall, and I know we've probably all been appreciating that when we're out and about walking. So this is a little poem about that. Was there ever a more splendid fall day? Bluer sky, redder leaves, brighter sun. I asked the romantic poets to walk with me this morning. Come, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, rhyme this beauty for me, name it, versify. Oh, but we have, they reply. Enjoy your solitary ramble. When you return home, we'll be there. 3rd shelf of the white bookcase. You try to find the words, they suggest. Sighing, I kick at blazing heaps of leaves. But it's not possible, I respond. You are whizzes, and I'm an amateur, stuck in the 21st century. Skepticism is the principal mode these days. We have lost the language of the sublime. So I guess it's about poetry. It's not just about a beautiful fall day. Maybe I'll read a tiny dog poem. I didn't know that was suggested to be a theme. Ganella, I have lots of dog poems, but here's a little one and then I'll be done. Dog sitting. You miss your people. I miss mine. Your big black head nudging my hand under the cover as I try to sleep in the small guest room. Eyes bleeding, tail wagging. It's only 5 a.m. We're friends, not besties, not family, together by circumstance. We walk downstairs. I give you water and dry food, one pill. I open the back door. You seek comfort under your particular azalea bush, I and my borrowed library book. Dog sitting in California. Thank you, Ganella. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you.
Max, did you want to come and play something in between before we continue? Please? Since we have him here, we might as well enjoy. Wait, I'm gonna drop that thing on your guitar. Good.
Green fields and rolling hills, room enough to do what we will. Sweet dreams of yestertime are running through my mind, of a place I left behind. Been so long, I can't remember when. I've been to Canaan and I wanna go back again. Been so long, I'm living till then. I've been to Canaan and I won't rest until I go back again. Though I'm content with myself, sometimes I long to be somewhere else. I try to do what I can, but with our day-to-day demands, we all need a promised land, and it's been so long, I can't remember when. I've been to Canaan and I wanna go back again. Been so long, I'm living till then. I've been to Canaan and I won't rest until I go back again. I've been to Canaan, I won't rest until I go back again.
Thank you, Max. Max was kind of raised in this synagogue. We were very proud of him and me the most because he's my student. And we have worked on these guitar skills for a very long time. So because we don't have our next featured reader, but we do have a future featured reader here. I would like to ask him to come up. His name is John Melifoniotis, and he wrote an absolutely beautiful memoir. If any of you are looking for a gift for this holiday season, to anybody who is either ill or a caretaker, I am neither at the moment, thank God, although I've been both. But I tell you, I cried like a baby at the end of this book. It's beautifully written, and the voice is so authentic and unflinching about how things really are when things get really tough. Is that all right to say? So I want to welcome John, who will be the featured reader here in January. But he brought some books if anybody is interested.
Okay.
That a bit since you're so tall.
This is right. This is okay. Thank you very much, Gunilla. I really appreciate being invited here tonight. I too was looking forward actually to hearing Karen Elizabeth Sharp. So now you're stuck with me. So my book is titled Why, a memoir of love and lymphoma. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I came to write the book. And I'll read a couple of excerpts from it. And at the end, I'll just have a brief anecdote to add that might interest you. My wife, Marilyn, who I'd been married to for about 40 years, died on October 9th, 2017 from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, actually from the side effects of her chemotherapy. Those of you who have some knowledge of the cancer journey know that the various therapies, the chemotherapy, can be fairly easy for some people, and it can be very harsh and difficult for other people. Unfortunately for my Marilyn, it was very hard. It was very hard on her, and she struggled with the side effects of the chemotherapy, and she died at Roswell very suddenly one night. It took me a little bit of time. It took me some time to recover and get my life back together again. And one of the ways I did that was to try to be useful. And what I mean by useful could be doing the laundry, making sure that the laundry got done. I was by myself, so somebody had to do the laundry. I had to do the laundry, dusting the floors, doing the shopping, working at the soup kitchen, at our church's soup kitchen. And after a while, I began to want to be useful in a broader sense, thinking that our experiences could be useful to people who were on their own cancer journey or whatever terrible affliction they were suffering from. So I wrote up all of my journal notes and typed them all up, read them. I kind of liked them. I thought they could be useful, but I began to see a story there, and I began to add to them. I began to add stories from our lives, from earlier in our lives. some of them involving our families, some of them sort of rather intimate. And just kept going until finally I felt that there was a good story here that I wanted to tell. Most of the book takes place in 2017, but it does move back and forth in time. It is made up of many sections. Each one started with a date and a section title, because I wanted to make sure that you, the reader, knew where you were, since I was moving back and forth in time. And I'm aware of the dictum in publishing circles that you're not supposed to use the journal model to tell your story, but I felt I had to ignore them. So first I'm going to read a short excerpt from the section titled, Really, I Love You. And this is, sure. Section is titled, Really, I Love You. And the time is sometime in 1983. This was a time when Marilyn and I were living here in Buffalo. We had very little money at the time. She had a part-time job at UB. I was struggling to be a writer, to be a freelance writer, and bringing home maybe $50 every 2 weeks or something like that. So it was a time of struggle. One day, I think it was a Saturday afternoon, I came home from somewhere and found Marilyn taking a nap on our faded green couch in the living room. It was a fall day, and she had covered herself with her thin wool blanket, a blanket she had carried with her since her childhood. The blanket was made for a child and was so short that her small stockinged feet stuck out from under the bottom edge. I stood there and looked at her for a minute. How beautiful she looked, lying face up, her small fingers holding the blanket up to her neck, the gold hair spread out on the green couch pillow. What had she gotten by marrying me? She was no closer to a creative life of beauty, of writers, of artists, of travel to meet friends in Paris than if we had not met. Then her eyes opened. She smiled at me. I knelt down on the colorful oriental pattern rug we had bought on sale from Sears. If you nap now, I said, how will you sleep tonight, pet? She yawned. Oh, she said, but you should know it won't bother me. I can sleep anytime. Are you sad? I asked. You've been sleeping a lot lately. She gazed at me. A half smile briefly played on her face. I don't know, maybe. About anything in particular? Our life? Ha! I made a sarcastic laugh, as if I'd made a joke. I don't know. You know, I've always been this way. She blinked, and her face brightened, as if she wanted to impress a point on me. But I'm not sad the way I used to be. Really, I love you. I love you too, babe. And now I'd like to go to a longer excerpt, which is much later in the book. This section is titled, Help Me. Marilyn is deep in her struggle at this point with the side effects from the chemotherapy. And we're both deep in the struggle. I've taken care of her, and we're dealing with the pain and the constant physical discomforts. So the section is titled Help Me, and the time is October 5th, 2017. We woke up at about 8 o'clock this morning and slowly dragged ourselves downstairs. Even though we had slept later than usual, it was not enough for me. I still felt very tired. I asked Marilyn how the mouth sores were, hoping the last drops of morphine I had put in her mouth were still working. I don't know. I think they're the same. Let me lay down on the sofa. I can't sit at the table. I helped her get to the sofa with her walker. Instead of going to the kitchen to prepare her pills and breakfast, I slumped into my leather reclining chair and put my feet up. Let me just sit here a few minutes, babe. I'll get your pills and make breakfast in a few minutes. I let my head fall back on the head cushion. Classical music played on our radio. Time was passing. I had to get her pills and give her her daily shot. The medications were taken on a schedule, and it was best to take them within certain hours. We were already late, but my arms and legs felt too heavy. I needed a little more rest. My hands started to itch again. I scratched them and the itching grew worse. God, what was this about? I tried to ignore it. I wanted to get up to run cool water over my hands, but I was too tired. Marilyn was lying on the sofa. The morning sunlight through the big living room window showed the gray-brown freckles on her face. Her eyes were closed. Another 5 minutes passed. I squeezed my hands together. They became hot and swollen. They hadn't felt like that before. I had to get myself up and run water over my hands. I pushed myself up from the chair. I walked slowly around the corner of the partition to the kitchen area, out of Marilyn's sight. Half-filled glasses with water and dirty dishes still sat on the marble counter around the kitchen sink. That was awful to see. I had forgotten to put the dishes into the dishwasher last night. I had not done that before. Suddenly, I felt very dizzy. I stopped walking. The windows, dishes, and cabinets all started moving around me. My legs shook. My sight dimmed. I stumbled forward and reached out with both hands toward the kitchen sink to grasp the edge and keep myself up. But everything went blank. In the darkness, I heard the tinkle of glass and metal and felt something cold on my chest and stomach. I don't know how long I lay on the kitchen floor unconscious. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute. I never fainted like this in my life. Eventually, I heard a sound. John? On? Marilyn was calling my name. On? Of course, Marilyn could not see me. She heard the crash, but she didn't know what it was. She could not simply get up and rush over to the kitchen to see, nor did she know why I wasn't responding. John, what happened? I opened my eyes. In a few seconds, I realized my head lay sideways on the wet, dark wood boards of the kitchen floor. Pieces of what looked like glass shined somewhere near my eyes. My eyeglasses were not on my face. I understood that I had fainted for some reason. Babe, I said softly. I don't think she heard. I tried to say the word again, but I was so weak that I only opened my lips and then closed them again. I tried to lift my head, but could not. I did not know where my hands were, and I could not make them move. My eyes closed, and I thought that I should go to a hospital. Something terrible was happening to me. But if I was taken to a hospital, who would prepare the medications and breakfast for Marilyn? Whoever it was would not know how to make the cream of wheat the way she wanted it. And how would they know about her medications? Would they be able to find the list of drugs I had made and printed? And would they understand the schedule? Would they understand my notes? How would they coax Marilyn to take the pills and liquids? From somewhere in the house, I heard a new sound. I didn't know what it was. A scraping sound, perhaps. It started and stopped. Babe, I managed to say, louder than the first time. The scraping sound came a little closer. I recognized it, the aluminum feet of Marilyn's walker dragged haltingly over the living room floorboards. She was lurching towards the kitchen. Babe, I'm all right. I just need to rest here. What happened? She called again, her voice near to me. She was on the other side of the kitchen counter from where I was lying, and thus could not see me. She was too short to see over the counter, to see me lying on the floor. Even if she reached me, I knew she was too weak to help me. I tried again to lift my head, but still could not. I concentrated on my fingers and realized that I was able to move them a little. I felt the floor and pressed on it. A movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. I turned my eyes as much as I could and saw one of the gray legs of her walker poke into view just past the edge of the counter. Babe, I'm okay, I said. What are you doing? With a couple more lurches, her light green sweatpants appeared. I arched my neck and this time lifted my shaking head off the floor. She came into view, her head and red beret silhouetted by the morning light from the window behind her. She turned her walker toward me, but in making the turn, she stumbled. The walker flew from her hands. She tried to grab the end of the marble counter with one hand, but it wasn't enough to keep her upright. She fell straight down and landed flat on her bottom. She sat on the kitchen floor with her legs splayed wide apart. She seemed unhurt. We stared at each other. Her face was wide-eyed and startled. Babe, I'm all right, I said again. I attempted a normal voice, but I could only whisper. She came forward onto her hands and knees and crawled toward me. There's broken glass here, pet. Stay back, I said. But she ignored my warning. As she crawled closer to me, she moved out from the glare of the window behind her, and I could clearly see her face. It had changed from when I left her in the living room. The sunken cheeks, the lines around the corners of her mouth, the pale skin, all were gone. Her face looked young. It was as if I was looking at her in her apartment in Pittsburgh, nearly 40 years before, two of us on her living room carpet, listening to her records, and she coming to kiss me. Just as she had back then, she was coming to rescue me. Thank you. Do we have time for me to just mention one thing, one brief?
Great, sure. We'd love to hear more.
I'll make it very short because I think this might interest people. One of the first things that I was asked by friends after they had read my book early this year was something like, "I'll bet it was good therapy," and that caught me completely unaware. I'd never thought of writing the book as therapy. And yet, as I thought about it, and I got asked this again and again, and sometimes people would simply tell me, I know it was good therapy. And in many ways, this is true, that any type of art or craft is going to have some therapeutic benefit for you. And yet, this wasn't my intention of writing, and I don't think it's the intention of any or any artist or a writer necessarily to work on their craft as therapy. I just wanted to tell a really good story. That was my intention. That was what I set out to do. First, I wanted to be useful, but more and more it was just that I wanted to tell a good story for you to understand us. That's my anecdote. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hear you again in Japan.
Looking forward to it.
And Ganilla,
Yes.
will you share? Will you share a poem or two, please?
That was my idea now. And then if Max wanted to play a piece or two, well, the guys are going out there in the lobby probably to sell books. So whoever wants to do whatever. Now, I had an amazing experience yesterday. A poem I did not actually remember writing was accepted into a literary magazine that accepts 4% of
Wow.
submitted. 4%. And they took this poem, and I was like, did I write this poem? Like, is this just some kind of weird thing? So I had to go looking for it, and I wanted to read it to you because when I read it, I thought, you know what? If somebody else had written this poem, I would have liked it. So it's a poem about the Holocaust. I'm married into a Holocaust family, and once I had children, of course, my family was a Holocaust family. So it's in 3 parts. It's kind of first a poetic version of what paradise, when it's no longer paradise, what it's like. Then there's a part about the Berlin train station, Grunewald train station, where you're nodding, you know people, where my husband's mother and other relatives, they were deported from that train station. And then it was what happened with my daughter Shiri, whom some of you know quite well, when she refused to go to the Yom HaShoah when she was 7 years old. So this is the poem. I call it After the Storm. After the storm, we parachute into a new garden, borders erased, minutes changing size. Can a frozen Eden be well watered? Pond's ice-blind eye staring at a white sky. Strangers follow the red moon, grow and diminish. Nothing plain in the unknown. No longer visiting, yet they are welcome. We set a plate at the table for unnamed ghosts and guests. Remember walking downstairs to hug a book, to trace it, smell it, read a name. At Yad Vashem, a hand and names in tombs, tombs, no paradise. At Berlin's Grunewald station, track 17, metal plaques, one for each deportation of Berlin Jews, October 1941 to February 1945. None of them to Eden. Names extraneous, not included. 50,000 names, too many. They follow moon and word. Strange, but not extraneous. Knowing their names is constancy, not lunacy. Synergy between then and now, holding them a choice. It's boring, says my 7-year-old, stamping her barefoot. You are old enough to choose, I say. But no 1.5 million were children, just like you, murdered for being what you are. If we don't remember, who will? Looking at the spring garden greening outside our kitchen, I pray. When we leave, she comes along, hair brushed and braided. So then I have another poem that I wrote just in the last couple of days. It's in 4 parts, and it's sort of on the same theme that I feel more and more in the last 20 years or so, our world is divided between those who have a home, a roof, a door, a key, and those who are out there walking. We saw it in Europe. I mean, Sweden took in more migrants per capita than any other country in Europe, from, the Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, so forth. So I've seen people, when I grew up, I never saw a homeless person in the street, but I've seen many and many. So it's partly kind of, that's part of what it is. And it's also a dream, and since Max is here, Max was in my dream, but he was much younger. So the boy here was really, so it's a poem for you too. And I'm sorry if you come across as a little young here. Autumn Shapes 1. I understand the draft and the undertow, the sudden change of mood and physical space, the fist and the squeeze, the hard tug, the sudden run, the air left lonely in the air, helpless and less important again, just useless, trodden down like a worn staircase where every step, if you look closely, makes a face. I took the torn lace outside, dropped it in a pot by the train station, and looking back now, saw it waving at me and knew it will bloom again. If not for me, for someone else or the boy eager to leave. We'll take the cobblestones until we find our way, I say, but he shook his head. A red wagon blocked that narrow road. Why, how interesting, I said, to see what unfolds, how we can squeeze by, how they will make it move again under magnolia, lilac petals, shouting at the gravel, mapping our grouting path. 2. In the oval park, west of the train station, every bench a dark, solitary pocket, packed with soft, still bodies, sleeping or dead, each falling leaf a spark. I touch a woman's hand and don't know if she's just cold or gone. Darkness surrounds us like a tight skin. It breaks inside me, snarling, it wakes me. 3. The white stone from the square to the scattered beaches, trying to catch every sail, like a shivering mother raising her children, if she's lucky, taking them to a real place without these remnants, torn flags, and burning tires. We run down curling steps that hook our toes, telling us this story unravels with smoke and the smell of gas. It is our time to see former neighbors and friends celebrate while clay surrounds us and our quick escape shapes us as clearly as the pottery man makes out of nothing a vessel strong enough for water or wine. We climb down the wide stairs and see in each step a mouth spelling, daring us to a getaway full of defiance. And before I read number 4, I want to just remind those of you who are not up on your Old Testament or the Bible that Ur is one of the oldest cities in the world that we know. You are Ur, and that's where Abraham came from. And Abraham is probably one of the very first wandering Jews, wandering refugees we know of. So it's in here. And back in those days, like even in ancient Greece, when something was made in a certain town, it was stamped, like ceramics, glass, Samoan ware, for example. So people don't know this, so they don't understand. I took this to my writing class and they were all like, skip that first line. And to me, it was the most bestest line of the whole poem. But that's the background of it. So please bear with me. It's an ode to the road. Oh, road, palimpsest of 1,000 generations, stamped, I'm sure, origin, birth. You stole my home and my name, made me an actor. I ask you, why does the boy carry a rodent in his pocket, share our rare bread with it? Eyes glisten and gleam in the dark, nails scratch and claw. In my pocket, deep, eating into lint and seam, a key. Oh, road, your dogs are always growling, bare teeth, sharp as stones. Trains flying south so tight together, sky paints with mother of pearl. Our faces covered in masks of dust, behind them the rot of leprosy. Erase, erase every step. Why? Was that why I turned around on the road and locked the door to a house no longer standing? That's it for us, I think, for tonight. Thank you. Max, if you want to play some more, if you please, we can sell books out in the hallway. And yeah, thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful evening. You want to do a little something? Oh, yeah. What does it mean? Tell everybody what it is. Sim Shalom.
Means peace,
Yeah.
right?
It's a prayer for peace.
Prayer for peace. That's what we need.
Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. Pain b'chesed v'rachamim aleinu be'al kol Yisrael. Amen. Im Shalom. Tova Bracha. Sim Shalom. Tova Bracha. Sim Shalom. Tova Sim Shalom. Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom. Torah Uveracha. Sim Shalom. Tova Uveracha. Tova Uveracha. Thank you.
You can sing that one.
I don't know.
You-
I don't.
Do you remember the words?
Not really, no.
Tell the story.
Well, it's more it was my sister's Torah portion. And it's about like, yeah, it's about moving forward, really.
It's good enough.
Lechilach to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha to a place you do not know. Lechilach. On your journey, I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechilach. Lechilach, and I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lechilach, to the place that I will show you. Lesimchat hayim. Lesimchat hayim, lesimchat hayim, lechi.
And thank you for coming. And this is the conclusion. I hope Max will come again. We'll have to tell him that we really would like to hear some. Thank you for coming and good night. L'Echila.